Okay, so next we'll have a look at connecting these wires up to our input jack and installing the input jack. Okay, so next we want to wire up our 2 wires to our input jack, and that'll pretty much complete the electronics. An S-style or T-style guitar kit are pretty much 2 of the simplest guitars in terms of wiring. So if you're not experienced with soldering, it's a good choice, this style of guitar. Now, as I said, we've only got the 2 wires to connect up here. As we know before, the black was our ground and the red was our hot wire. Now on the actual input jack, you'll see we've got 2 lugs. The lug that's connected to the inner sleeve is our ground, and the lug connected to the outer ring, which is incidentally connected to this arm which locks the cable in place, is our hot wire. If you take a guitar jack or guitar cable, pop it through, you'll see that the cable's separated by that rubber ring, and the tip is then in touch with the hot, while the shaft of the cable is in touch with the ground, and that's pretty much how that signal's transferred. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is some soldering. So if you haven't done any soldering before, pretty much any cheap soldering iron will do the job if you're only making a couple of quick connections like this. If you're going to work on a few more guitars, then you're probably going to be better off having something with a little bit more temperature control and a more solid base. Obviously you're going to need a few things. So first thing you need is, of course, a soldering iron. Next thing you need is some solder. Now your kit will come with more than enough solder to complete this relatively small job. I'd also keep a damp sponge nearby just to clean the tip of your soldering iron. And when it comes to soldering, the other thing I'd recommend is to keep the tip of your soldering iron tinned. And what that means is you're just having a small coating of solder on the tip of your soldering iron, and that prevents the tip from oxidizing. So generally when the tips start going or they start oxidizing, the solder balls up and doesn't really stick properly. So you can see I've just got a thin coating of solder there. Now I'd also tin those wires as well, but first I'm just going to put some protection in place for the finish. As I said, the black's our ground, so that gets connected to the lug that's connected to the inner sleeve. That's the word on soldering as well. When you are soldering connections, I should just tin those 2 components as well. When you are soldering, just keep in mind soldering is not really like gluing something together. It's more a transfer of heat. So you'll have solder on your iron, and the soldering iron will be hot, and the solder will be drawn to that heat. So you do need to heat up your elements a little first before you can expect the solder to stick. So in the case of this connection here, I'll heat up the actual lug for a couple of seconds before I bring the solder in and complete the connection. Just having a little trouble seeing that. Okay. So just bending that back a little bit to hold it in place. Make sure I can get to it there. You do definitely want to have some protection for your finish as well. As I said, just apply some heat, just a couple of seconds, just till it's hot enough. Just drop a small amount of solder on. Don't need to use much. and just test the connection. So just give the wires a small pull, and that one's fine. So I'm just going to tin that as well. So I'll just push that through the eyelet of the hot lug. Okay. So obviously make sure when you put this in place that the jack's facing downwards.